Welcome back from the morning sessions. Been a lot of talk about bipartisanship today and yesterday, and we have a real treat in store for you now. Joining us from Arlington, Virginia is the former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. As many of you know, Mr. Gingrich, Speaker Gingrich, was Speaker of the House from 1995 to 1999. He was named Times Man of the Year in 1995. He's now the author of more than 24 best-selling books. And we're very pleased to have him with us here today. Van Jones is the president and founder of Rebuild the Dream, and also Dream Corps Unlimited, which is a platform for bottom-up, people-powered innovations, as he says, to help fix the U.S. economy. He's written 2 New York Times bestsellers, and he has worked as the Green Jobs Advisor to the Obama White House. Now, it also happens that Speaker Gingrich, before he became Speaker in 1994, he engineered the Republican takeover of the House of Representatives, the first time in 40 years that the Republicans control of the U.S. House, put out a plan called the Contract with America, and one of the key points in the Contract with America was a piece called the Taking Back Our Streets Act, which called for truth in sentencing and basically putting a lot more people behind prison walls for a lot longer sentences. On the other hand, we have Mr. Jones, who, as part of all the work that he's doing these days, runs an initiative called #Cut50, a national bipartisan initiative that seeks to reduce the prison population by half in the next 10 years. So given those two backgrounds, it's of course hardly surprising that we hear a rumor at any rate that they might agree that together and working together, we might be able to have less crime and less incarceration. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. You've got a room full here of about 400 of the leaders on criminal justice reform in this country. You have executive branch officials, legislative branch officials, judges, corrections officials, and other in this room eager to hear what gives.
Well,
I'm delighted to be with you, and I think we've agreed that Van's going to start, and I'm going to pick up from his points, but I think you will be surprised how many things we agree on in this area. But Van, why don't you take it away?
Very, very good. Well, first of all, it's an honor to be here. It's always an honor to be with you, Mr. Speaker. We got a chance to spend, Newt and I, about a year on television, on CNN with a show, debating every issue in the world. And we probably didn't agree on, 99% of it, but when it came to how we could do a lot better when it comes to community safety, when it comes to saving money and lives in our criminal justice system, the overlap was really shocking. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of my background. He'll tell you some of his. But I think we're in a moment now, Newt and I have had this discussion quite often, where we could actually come together bipartisan and get some smart stuff done. I am probably the least likely person to be talking about criminal justice issues at all, given that my father was a cop in the military, and I was a nerd, so I never got in any trouble, mainly because I didn't want to get in trouble with my dad. But I was able to grow up in his household. He was born in poverty and segregation in Memphis, Tennessee. Was able to get himself through college, my uncle through college, who just retired from the Memphis City Police Force. His cousin through college, me through college, and my sister through college. I wound up going to Yale for law school. And when I got to Yale, because I was such a nerd, I didn't get involved in any of the crazy stuff that happens on college campuses. But I noticed a difference in what happened with the kids from Yale who got in trouble with drinking and drugs versus the kids in the housing projects about 3 or 4 blocks away. I saw the kids at Yale, because of various kinds of privilege, they would get at most rehab, and maybe they take a semester off, they come back, they'd be able to go on to graduate school. The kids a few blocks away, they would wind up going to prison, sometimes for doing the same drugs or even smaller amounts. And that bothered me. And having grown up in such an uber patriotic household, it really curdled my spirit. And I wound up working on criminal justice issues in California for a long time. And the things that I kind of came to was that, wow, in California we were spending about $120,000 per year per kid to lock a kid up. At that time, you could send 3 kids to Yale for the cost of sending 1 kid to jail. So I knew something was wrong. So I worked for about 10 years on those issues and have come to the conclusion that there are many, much smarter way for us to make our community safer and to get kids back on track. And that's kind of how I come to this issue.
I think my path was substantially different, although like Van, I guess you could say that I was a bookworm, and I certainly did not have any run-in with the law, except for occasional traffic violations. But I was also hardcore on the issue of crime, and I still am. I think you go back and look at crime in New York City before Rudy Giuliani and crime afterwards. You look at what Bill Bratton did as the commissioner under Giuliani to turn around the situation, the application of James Q. Wilson's model of safe neighborhoods and the idea that if you crack down on graffiti and broken windows, you actually have a substantial effect on the entire neighborhood becoming safer. Now, all those things were true. And certainly if you were to look at the number of people, if you projected out from the death rate to the killing rate in New York City in 1992 and up to today compared to what has actually happened under first Giuliani and then Bloomberg, there are several thousand people alive today who would not have been had we continued with the patterns of the early 90s. So in that sense, being tough on crime, I think, is legitimate. And when you talk about violent crime, I'm prepared to defend very tough sentences and a very tough approach to people who either rape or kill other people. But the fact was there were tremendous unintended consequences. The truth is, locking up people who are engaged in very minor drug offenses destroyed their future. It didn't teach them a lesson, and it didn't seem to have any effect on convincing the rest of the community. And so what's happened over the last 20 years, if you're honest and you look at the data and you talk to people who are engaged in this, you have to come to a conclusion that there are substantial aspects of the way we've gone through sentencing and the way we've gone through parole that have to be rethought, because there are too many people who are being excluded from the right to pursue happiness. They're being excluded from the opportunity for full citizenship. And it has now, frankly, become an enormous burden in and of itself. So you could argue that the burden of inappropriate incarceration is almost as great as the burden of violent crime used to be, in the degree to which it distorts and cripples a community. I was particularly hastened in moving towards these views by my working with Chuck Colson, who, as many of you know, had been a Nixon administration White House official, had ended up going to jail as a part of the Watergate scandal, ended up, I think, realizing that prisons as we run them in America are just wrong. They're a violation of the very ethos of the American spirit and our desire to believe that we've been endowed by our Creator with inalienable rights. And so Colson had built a faith-based prison movement that focused on helping people convert, helping them find themselves, helping them achieve a fundamentally different approach to life. So when they left prison, they were dramatically less likely to go back to jail. And he was achieving 3 and 4 times the rate of getting people to be able to live in society, get a job, become a full citizen, compared to prisons that didn't have this kind of a program. I then worked with Pat Nolan, who I had known back when he was the Republican leader in the Assembly in California, and he and Colson had worked very closely together on the prison ministry program. And we began to develop the whole concept of right on crime, making the argument that it is both financially better from a taxpayer standpoint and safer in the long run from a community standpoint, and better for the human beings who were currently crippling by inappropriately putting them in places where they don't learn, they don't go to a college, they don't go to a vo-tech school, they go to a school of criminality, and they come out more likely to be criminals than when they went in. And so over the last 14 or 15 years, working particularly with Pat Nolan and people around him, and now the Right on Crime organization, and working with the American Enterprise Institute, which hosted a series of very encouraging dinners where we looked at the range of opportunities. I really do believe we are entering a period where there have been enough tests and enough things going right that we can create a bipartisan majority, both at the state and the federal level, to rethink the whole criminal justice system, to maximize public safety by keeping those who are truly violent off the street, but to also maximize public safety and the community's health as a society by minimizing putting people inappropriately in the wrong kind of incarceration and maximizing developing programs of retraining and of help and of appropriate parole to enable people to reintegrate into society as productive citizens. So I look forward to hearing Van talk a little bit more about it. I know for him, this has also been a journey, and we have both been learning together as we've been talking about these ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I think is amazing is if you took a transcript of what Newt just said, he didn't say put his name on it, just took it, posted it up on the internet, you would probably have 80, 90% agreement with that statement on both sides. It's balanced, it's fair, but it also shows real compassion for the people who sometimes make mistakes when they're young, and the impact of those mistakes on certain parts of our population. I think this has become a bipartisan moment of realization and opportunity. And I think it's important that many of you in the room who went early, my dad used to say, to lead means to go first. And so many of you are leaders in the true sense. You went first, possibly in communities where there might have been some trepidation. You had to take some risk. But you're now beginning to show some results that should inspire and encourage people across the country, encourage in the literal sense, give them more courage to get out the dumb track and onto the smart track about how we use public dollars and how we impact the lives of especially young people. Now that said, because there has not been this sort of more bipartisan conversation and discussion up until now, Newt and I have been working very, very hard to reach out to folks. We can't put everybody's name on the table now, but we will soon, to bring people together very early next year to have a convening of some kind in Washington, D.C., to take this conversation public, to take it to the national airwaves, and to create even more momentum behind this moment, I think, of bipartisan opportunity. In particular, this idea that you have been experimenting and you've been learning, and that great work is actually taking place that people may not even know about. That's something I think that gives a lot of hope, a lot of encouragement to people on both sides of the aisle. I think that many Democrats, I'm going to ask Newt why he thinks that so many Republicans are now moving. I think many Democrats have felt afraid to move because they might get accused of being soft on crime, or they might see a Willie Horton ad run against them, that kind of fear. And I think that the public and the Republicans have moved on. And I think Democrats actually have let some of the innovation and some of the reform slip away to the red states. So I think that those of us in blue states need to start catching up to the public and catching up to the performance data and catching up to some of the experimentation. So I think we've been there ideologically, but we haven't been there politically. Newt, why do you think that Republicans have been moving with such, I guess, force in some of the red states?
Well, let me say, first of all, I think it's very hard on the conservative side to understand how this evolved over the last 20 years without realizing what extraordinary impact Chuck Colson and then Pat Nolan had. Chuck became a genuine moral force. And there were people who were just in awe of him. Jack Kemp was one of his major boosters in going around and saying, look, we've got to really pay attention to this. I also think on the right, there was a growing sense that facts matter. Whatever your theory was in the early 1990s, and as I said, I'm very comfortable defending the kind of turnaround that Giuliani and Bratton did in New York and its public effect in terms of people who are still alive today. But at the same time, you just had to look at the data and realize that we were putting way too many people in jail. You cannot be a conservative who inherently distrusts government and who inherently favors personal freedom and look at the number of people in jail in the United States and not be deeply troubled. And you can't, as a conservative, say that you believe in the notion in our Declaration of Independence that we're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and then turn around and say, but by the way, for this 2 or 3 million people, we're just going to throw away the key, even if what they did was a very minor crime. And I think the weight of fact forced a number of us to say, you know, we didn't get it quite right, and we better go back and rethink it. And I give a lot of credit to people like Governor Rick Perry and the Texas legislature, who very early, 7 or 8 years ago, began undertaking very substantial reform. Now, there's a second part to this, to be totally candid, and that is, if you are a fiscal conservative who doesn't want to raise taxes and doesn't want to build bigger government, and you begin to realize that prisons were beginning to be major devourers of the budget. Between health care and prisons, you weren't going to have any money for roads, you weren't going to have any money for education, you weren't going to have any money for the state parks. And so there was a real incentive to say, wait a second, do we really have to build? I think in Texas, the break point was when they got a report that said they had to build 3 more prisons. And they said, wait, there's got to be a better way to do this than just to continually put more and more of our population in jail. So there was both a fiscal concern, a pragmatic concern, and a moral concern coming together on the right. And it's had an effect in Georgia, where my good friend Governor Nathan Deal has been a real leader in this. It's had an effect in South Carolina, where Governor Nikki Haley has been pushing it. It's happened in North Carolina. We had a great briefing earlier this year on Mississippi. And you see almost everywhere a bipartisan coalition. And I think Van is right. You see a little more, and this is probably psychologically the right thing to do, you see a little more aggressiveness among conservatives, which protects then more moderate and liberal politicians who can be part of it without being attacked for being soft on crime. And then state after state, you're seeing people who are doing interesting things. One of my goals is going to be to pull together every major experiment. These are laboratories of democracy at the state level. And to see if we can't build literally a cookbook of things that are working, to start looking for ideal models and for synergistic reinforcements of different experiments. And then to get the feds, who have really been laggards on this, to get the feds engaged in really rethinking the approach at the federal level to the exact same problem.
Good. Well, you know, a couple things that I would just add to that. I think on the Democratic and progressive side, the moral case also has a concern for racial justice, and that's something I think we got to figure out to balance out as we kind of bring two sides together. Different people see it differently. The data, though, on race is very disturbing. I don't have to tell you guys that. Everybody in this room is up to speed on it. But the way that's impacted, I think, the desire for change at the grassroots level can sometimes be overlooked. To throw out a couple of names, obviously, Michelle Alexander, a friend of mine actually since we were teenagers, wrote a book called The New Jim Crow. It really walked through some of the racial impacts. That book lit a fire in the African-American church community. In fact, when Michelle's book first came out, it was a complete dud. The hardcover, I think I bought a copy, she bought a copy, maybe her cousin bought a copy, that was about it. But she then went on a book tour throughout the African-American church community talking about this issue. So when the paperback came out, it became a New York Times bestseller. And one of the people who read the book was Rand Paul. And so Rand Paul has actually been quoting her book on the floor of the Senate, which shocked a lot of people in the African-American community. We said, wait, maybe we're missing something that's happening on the conservative side. And yet, very little has been done. The Obama administration has taken some important steps, but across the board, if you live in blue states, you haven't seen as much reform. So I think you're in this really strange moment now where there's opportunity for really interesting, strange bedfellows. A lot of the concern about what's going on right now in Ferguson, take out the particularities about do you believe this account or that account or the protests versus the National Guard. Just take that out. Just why is there so much resonance in terms of people feeling like maybe African-American young men are not being given a fair shake by law enforcement? Well, that's not just because of one incident. There is this overall sense in the African-American community, I think people are quite aware of it, that there's more of a guilty until proven innocent standard. All of that creates some heartbreak, but it also creates real opportunity, I think, for new coalitions, for African Americans who are concerned about their kids and their kids' future to stand with people who are conservative, who maybe we haven't had that conversation before, and to get a different kind of set of solutions. I think people will be surprised at how deeply conservative many African Americans are when it comes to raising young people. My dad was no liberal when it came to raising kids. And he was very much about you have to have consequences for bad action. But the question is, do you have the right mix of carrots and sticks? And so that's really, I think, where the opportunity is. Like, what is that right mix? What does the data show? And can we have leadership from both sides and all perspectives so that we can get a more fair system? I'm concerned that we're just throwing away an awful lot of genius. Newt mentioned the moral part of this. I think conservatives sometimes are unfairly seen as only interested in the cost-saving aspect of it. The conservatives I've been meeting with are actually just as concerned about the moral side of it and the principles involved, like Newt said, liberty and that kind of stuff. We are wasting a ton of genius in our country. Some of these younger people in the community are maybe overly entrepreneurial. They haven't been given the opportunity to make money in a good way, in a smart way. And so you got an over-indexing of really smart kids, sometimes winding up behind bars. If we can figure out a way to get those young folks on a better pathway, and frankly, some of the conservative folks in the business community might actually be better mentors than some of the people they've been looking at on TV to find mentorship. There's a real different America out there, I think, that's possible if we come together. Newt, how does that line up with your view? And how do you see the kind of racial justice concerns? I know that can be a sensitive matter sometimes for the conservatives.
Well, let me start there for a second, because I think it's a very important part of what's happened, and it's something which people like J.C. Watts and Colin Powell were talking to me way back when I was Speaker. I think it's very hard for white Americans to understand how different the view is of the justice system and how different the view is very often of policing if you're African American. And I think that that's a significant factor. I think it's also one of the things that has led us to a much deeper concern for the way in which we have created a generation of criminals by putting them in prison where the only thing they learned was criminality, is that it actually began in the poorer neighborhoods to make going to prison okay. So instead of it being a deterrent, it was just part of life. You had a cousin who'd been there, you had a good friend who'd been there, just you go, you come back. And watching that evolve over the last 20 or 25 years, I think has been enormously disturbing to those of us who really do believe that America can't be a great country and it can't be a strong country if you write off 5 or 10 or 15% of the American people and leave them behind in neighborhoods of violence and with drive-by shootings and some of the horrifying things you see in some of our neighborhoods. So I do think all of that has come together. I also think that there's a new generation, and this is something that's going to be very interesting to watch. When I talk to a Scott Walker, a Rick Perry, a John Kasich, and Kasich's a good example because Kasich got 26% of the African American vote and was endorsed by the largest black newspaper in Ohio running for re-election. And Kasich argues that a lot of what he's doing is just very hands-on. It's how do you go into a community, into a neighborhood, how do you actually get real people in a room, how do you organize a practical program, tie them in with a real business, end up with real jobs. It's not theoretical, it's not big macro policy, it's inch by inch trying to get things solved. That changes you. And so you've got, I think, a whole new generation. And I would include a Bobby Jindal. I mentioned Rick Perry earlier, who's been the longest serving governor of Texas, in part because he keeps evolving and doing things and trying to modernize the state. But you got Nikki Haley. All of these folks come out of a generation where they stipulate that they're in a new world, that government hasn't worked. And if you think government hasn't worked over here, why would you think government works in prison? And so you actually have the same skeptical attitude carried to its most obvious vividness by Rand Paul. But you're going to find a lot of these governors are fully as skeptical and fully as interested in being practical. And if there's any vindication of the American model and having distributed power back to the states and having the states as laboratories of democracy. It's watching these governors working with their state legislatures, developing new experiments, some copying each other, some of it purely out in the open, just doing it on their own. And I think you're going to see that there is a real passion, because one of the things that happens to you if you're the right kind of governor is every person in your state is part of your family, and you're the governor of the whole state. And you go into a neighborhood that's really poor, you go into a family that's been broken up, you see 20 kids at Christmas whose parents are in jail. If you're a decent governor, you have to be troubled in your heart, because those are your folks, and you're the governor of their state. And I think what you've got is a new generation that is willing to reach out and be the governor of all the people. And for Republicans, that's a big breakthrough. And I think in the aggressive innovation they bring, they may have an edge to them that you wouldn't have gotten from somebody in a traditional Democratic governorship who knew the problem, but it wasn't shocking them. It was just part of their part of their mental baggage, but it wasn't a shock. For a lot of these guys, this is a real shock, and they roll up their sleeves, and they're willing to take risks to try to get some solutions.
I wanted to talk a little bit about something positive that did happen in a blue state. Newt's doing a good job cheering for the red team. I should probably stick up for a blue state. In California, we did pass Prop 47. I was so proud of Lenore Anderson, who helped to lead that fight. She started off as an intern in my little civil rights not-for-profit, 15 years ago, and now she's gone on. Prop 47, of course, I'm sure everybody there is familiar with it, but I think it's a great model because it does take dollars that would have been spent locking people up, and it does some smart stuff with that money, including victim services, which I think is something that sometimes falls out of the conversation among liberals, but victim services, but also mental health, because right now we're warehousing a lot of people who have mental health issues in the prison system, which is making the problem a lot worse instead of better. And then also education and reentry. And the coalition that came together to make Prop 47 work was a left-right coalition. You had literally Newt Gingrich and Jay-Z, the rapper, agreeing that here's something smart to do. As we have, with our initiative out of Rebuild the Dream, Cut 50, our idea is you could probably cut the prison population in half in 10 years if you had really smart, as Newt says, breakout ideas, breakout thinking. We've been reaching out to both liberals and conservatives, and we found an incredible amount of overlap and agreement in at least 3 areas. One area is just the area of pretrial detention. Sometimes somebody gets in trouble before they've even can see a judge. They've been locked up 6 weeks, 3 months because they don't have enough money to pay the bail. That may not be liberty and justice for all. That violates your justice sensibilities as well as your liberty sensibility. There may be something we could do together there on pretrial detention. Then there's this question around sentencing reform. It turns out, if you look at the data, just adding many, many more years onto some sentences doesn't actually have a positive impact on the crime rate, and sometimes it actually has people reoffending at higher rates. So there needs to be a data-driven look at what is the right sentence for various kinds of offenses. That's another area where there may be some opportunity to talk. And then reentry seems to be the one area that is almost unanimous. Left, center, right, all colors, all races feel like once someone has completed their sentence, whatever that sentence was, that when they're going to come back home, and they're going to be in our communities, they're going to be in our houses of worship, they're going to be in our movie theaters, they're going to be back a part of this community, that we need to do a much better job of setting them up to succeed and making sure they have the tools that they need, whatever support that they need, whatever job opportunities that they need, so that when they come home, they stay out of trouble, make the kind of contribution they could make, and actually start paying taxes rather than costing us taxes. And I have just been stunned by the level of just huge heart that people have once someone's finished their sentence, wanting somebody, if they come out and they say, I want to have an apprenticeship, I want to be able to get some kind of education, I want to be able to get my voting rights back, I want to be a part of this community. There seems to be a lot there. So those are 3 big areas, pretrial detention, sentencing reform, and reentry. where there's real opportunities, I think, for real discussion. And I think that taking what happened with Prop 47, where left and right did come together in California, and some law enforcement very strongly in California, I think is a very good way forward. So I wanted to stick up a little bit for a blue state since Newt was doing such a good job cheerleading for the red states.
Well, Van, let me actually build on that. First of all, working on Prop 47, which Pat Nolan helped get me involved in, it was very gratifying to work with you to try to make sure that both Democrat and Republican forces in California lined up, and the size of the majority for that was very gratifying, I thought. Second, I'll tell you a blue state story. Mario Cuomo developed an experimental program in which two former social workers created a company called America Works. And they went out, this was many years ago, and they developed a program where the people they hired got very large bonuses if they so thoroughly retrained a hardcore unemployed person that they were still in a job 6 months after their training period was over. But they didn't get the bonus unless they were still at work and still productive 6 months later. So these folks got into all sorts of detailed helping people make the transition, helping them learn to catch the bus on time, helping them learn to deal with child care problems if they got up in the morning and their child was sick, helping them learn how to dress, helping them to learn how to go and be interviewed. It's a very successful firm that Mario Cuomo, certainly a blue state governor of the first rank, helped launch. They've now gotten involved in helping prisoners, and I know they had one particular project in Illinois where they were doing a remarkable job of helping prisoners reintegrate back into productive society. And they were getting a very high percentage of people who were making the transition, actually learning how to be productive citizens, getting a job, getting reintegrated in the community. And I cite it because, I mean, they're based in New York City, so you can't be dramatically bluer unless you're based in San Francisco. And so they were a great example of a democratic liberal reform that in many ways has a conservative base to how it operates, but that's something that people can learn from in both parties. This is not something you can only do one way, one way. But let me also just take a minute to reverse, if I might, the flow of ideas for a second from Van and me. We're both here in part because we really want you to advise us. We'd love for you to share with us after your conference what you have done successfully, because I really think it'd be great to build a menu of everything that is working across the country and to see which parts of that apply to the federal government. We'd also love your thoughts on what do we need to focus on next? How can people like Van and me, who are very willing to take the heat for being bipartisan on this issue, how can we be helpful to you in your state in building momentum and building a coalition? Nobody has completed this journey. A number of states have started it very well. A number of interesting projects are very exciting. But we really want to become a country where only the most dangerous and hardest core people are locked up for a very long time, where truly mentally ill people are treated for mental illness. And that's another example where a great reform of the 60s and 70s turned out to maybe have some pretty big flaws built into it. And closing all the state hospitals actually transferred a fairly substantial number of people to prisons. That can't be the right answer on the mental health front. So that's a zone that needs a lot more bipartisan initiative. And we want to be helpful in getting people reintegrated into their neighborhood and then making sure their neighborhood has jobs so that they can truly be complete citizens, earn a living, have a sense of dignity, take care of their family and their relatives and so forth. So I just want to make sure that we communicate with you. This is not about these two guys, being on Skype telling you all the stuff we know. We would really love to get your feedback, your ideas, and educate us into how we can be more effective in this cause, because we do think it's a morally important cause.
Absolutely, and to make it even more specific and concrete, Newt and I are, we're serious about this. I mean, our staffs are in regular conversation, like on almost daily basis, trying to figure out how, in this new order where you're going to have a Republican majority Congress, you're going to have Obama in the White House, a lot of stuff they don't agree on, but we think there's this narrow strip of bipartisan agreement. We want to make sure something good comes out of that. So we're working together very, very hard. We're going to have a convening again. We'd love to get advice and counsel about how to make that convening work well. Again, the initiative, as we call it, is Cut 50. Just an idea to try to, can we think outside the box enough to really get down, as Newt said, just to the most hardcore folks who are going to be locked up. Everybody else, we've got to make sure that they're a good part of the community, but we got a range of tools we can bring to bear on that. But the other thing is that as we're thinking about creative solutions, I just want to make sure to put this on the table as well. We've also been talking to folks in Silicon Valley. We've been talking to people who are very creative and outside-the-box thinkers. In fact, my organization just had a hackathon in Philadelphia with about 100 mostly African-American underprivileged kids and a bunch of technologists coming up with ideas to how these kids could use technology, not just as downloaders, but as people who can come up with their own ideas and upload apps that would help themselves have better communities, better neighborhoods. A lot of the ideas that young people came up with would make the criminal justice system a lot better. And so, again, there's genius in Silicon Valley we need to bring in. There's genius in both parties we need to bring in. There's genius among the young people and the impacted populations themselves that we want to bring in. And so by doing that, we think we've got the opportunity to really hit reset on this conversation and to really get down to, as Newt was saying, putting forward real solutions that work for real people and that make a real difference. So.
And let me build on that just for a second. I did a book last year, which just came out in paperback, called Breakout. And the whole premise of Breakout is that we have all of these new technologies coming online that are going to just dramatically enhance our ability to get good things done if we're prepared to rethink how the bureaucracies work. Two simple examples. Virtually everybody in the room that we're talking to has used automatic teller machines. You can go anywhere in the world and get money out of an ATM in about 11 seconds. It currently takes the federal government 277 days to move a veteran's records from the Defense Department to the VA. Compare 277 days to 11 seconds. Virtually all of you in that room have smartphones. Many of you have iPads. The fact is, we haven't even begun to think about how could you use that kind of technology to, for example, create apprenticeships so that people are already connected to a business before they get out of jail, so that you have an electronically mediated parole system. You're able to have much more real-time, everyday relationship. It's not drop in once every 30 days or something. Nobody's thought about how do we redo all these things. Current bureaucracy really grew out of the manual typewriter, and the Pentagon is the perfect example. Opened in 1943, 17.5 miles of corridor, 31,000 employees, because they were going to fight a global war with manual typewriters and carbon paper. As a conservative, I think we ought to shrink the Pentagon to a triangle and get rid of 40% of the bureaucracy. Well, start thinking about what can you do to integrate in real time with a smartphone-centered system so that the person who's getting out is connected both to their job, to their parole officer, to knowing what they should be doing every day, in some cases to be getting reminders all day long. There are a lot of things we can do that we haven't thought about that I really recommend to all of you to go back home and think about what is the potential to integrate people 24/7 and do it in a way, as Carly Fiorina, the former head of Hewlett-Packard, says, the 21st century will be digital, mobile, virtual, and personal. You take those four words and say, we're going to apply them to criminal justice reform. I think you get another step down the road of creativity and of thinking through the kind of systems we could have if we had the courage to go try them out.
Thank you very much. Please use Newt and myself, and we want to be able to help lift up what you're doing. I think, just in closing, what you're doing is some of the most exciting and best stuff in the country. We've got this little campaign that we're doing called Cut 50. Newt's doing so many other things. We want to be your megaphone. So please reach out to us. I'll give you my email is vanjones@rebuildthedream.com. Anybody there, if you want us to take something, lift it up. Newt and I are on CNN together all the time. We're giving speeches all the time. Use us, use Newt, use Van, use Cut 50. Let's get the country behind you. You went first. You shouldn't go by yourself.
Thank you both so much.
Let me close and say, I want to thank you for hosting this. I want to thank them for letting Van and me come in by Skype from 2 different parts of the country. It's part of the modern world. And I want all of you to know that Van and I are deeply dedicated to this, and we look forward to hearing from you and to working with you.